The most common question I got from you, as many of you asked this question, you sort of were wondering, are evidentialism and reliabilism really incompatible? Or are internalism and externalism really incompatible? Or can they be reconciled in some way? I'm going to talk mostly about reliabilism and evidentialism here. Hopefully we'll have time to talk about this on Wednesday a little bit more because so many of you were interested in it. But let me just say the following. Evidentialism and reliabilism do seem to be incompatible as they're given by Connie and Feldman for evidentialism and Goldman for reliabilism. And one way we can see that is we've seen cases where they differ sort of in both directions. So we've seen cases where beliefs are formed by a reliable process, but your evidence doesn't support the belief. These are cases where reliabilism says you have a justified belief, but evidentialism says you don't. So the example we've seen of this case perhaps is the case of a belief from memory where you lost all the evidence for that belief. So you get the belief, you have the belief by means of memory, but you've lost all the evidence you had supporting that belief. This is like the case of the mole on the New York Times editor's face. You lost any reason, you lost all the reasons you had for that belief, but you still retain the belief through memory. And so that looks like a case where reliabilism says justified and evidentialism says not justified. There was a question about that. One of you asked a question about that, and I hope to talk about your question about that case in particular on Wednesday. Another case where they differ is a case where we have beliefs that are not formed by a reliable process, but your evidence supports the belief. So this is an example of this is the case where you formed a belief that Rufus is a hippopotamus because you like the sound of the sentence, even though you had sufficient evidence to form it by reasoning, by inference. But you don't form it by reasoning or inference. You form it on the basis of liking the way it sounds. That is not a reliable belief forming process, but you do have evidence that supports your belief. So this kind of case wasn't supposed to be an objection to Connie and Feldman, but it's a case, regardless of whether it's a good objection or not, it's a case where, on the one hand, we have a belief that is not formed by a reliable belief forming process, but it does fit the evidence the believer has. So evidentialism says it's justified, reliabilism says it's not. So these are just cases where the two come apart. And if the two views come apart, that means they're not, strictly speaking, compatible, as stated. Nonetheless, I think what most of you were concerned with was not whether these actual views were compatible as stated. Some of you even said, why are philosophers so concerned with getting things reduced to the simplest terms? And so that leads them to have these very extreme views on both sides, you might think, rather than combining the insights of each view. So can we take the insights of each view? Maybe we could say, look, justification depends in some ways on evidence and in other ways on a belief coming about by a reliable process. And some combination of these might work. This looks a little bit to me like what Hack was trying to do. Susan Hack was trying to do in her paper on foundationalism. She was taking some insights from foundationalism and some insights from coherentism and trying to combine those insights together into a single view. You might want to do the same thing with reliabilism and evidentialism, or even with the broader class, internalism and externalism. Now, two things we need to worry about if we're going to do this. One is you have to say exactly how the evidence part and the reliabilism part come together. How is it for a particular belief that evidence is part of the justification, what makes it justified, and how is it that reliable belief forming processes are? I'm not saying this can't be done. I think it can be done, but it's a hard task to say how they come together in each case. A more general thing to say, and this is what we thought about when we thought about Hack's view, is we want to make sure by combining them that we are taking the advantages of both views, the advantages of reliabilism and the advantage of evidentialism, and not merely the disadvantages of reliabilism and evidentialism. We've seen that there might be problems for both. We want to try to, in combining them, you might want to try to avoid the problems while gaining the advantages. This could perhaps be done. I'm not going to try to do that here. Some philosophers have tried to think about how to relate these, And I think hopefully we can talk a little bit more about how you might want to do that in our discussion on Wednesday.